This video has been brought to you by Squarespace, the online platform for building your business or growing your brand. More on them in a little while, but now on with the show. This is a classic UK spec NES. It definitely does play NES games, of course, but it's going to be a second-rate experience compared to this, the original Japanese version of the NES, the Nintendo Famicom. Now that may sound like a fairly extreme viewpoint. I mean, what am I, some kind of dried up gatekeeping gaming snob, you may well be thinking, and well, yeah, maybe I am, but this is not just some obsession with authenticity. No, I'm afraid not. You see, European NES consoles, they just run games too slowly. Not a little bit, not a tiny amount that you won't notice, but by a lot. And frankly, it's not just the NES, it's a whole load of other classic consoles too that have this problem. Let me demonstrate on the real hardware to begin with, so you know there's no tricky emulation stuff going on here. This is Gradius running on my Famicom exactly as it should do, running as its creators Konami intended, and it is, well, it's a bit of a classic. I happen to own a Famicom, but the North American NES would be just as good here. It runs games the same. Now let's take a look at the same thing on my UK NES. The exact same game, but everything is slower. Everything, even the music, is lower pitched. The enemies move slower, the scenery scrolls by more slowly, everything is slowed down by about 17%. This might not seem that huge, it probably doesn't look that different, but the game really does feel worse for it. It's just not quite the same at the slower speed. It's not totally unplayable or anything like that. In fact, it makes it a bit easier. But this is not the original game as it was in Japan or the USA. Analog video standards are at the heart of this, and Japanese and American NTSC consoles run games at the right speed. European PAL consoles run most games too slowly. Gradius is not just a one-off, most NES games have this problem. Let's have a side-by-side comparison. On the left we have the classic Contra running as it would do on the American NTSC NES, and on the right we have Probotector. Yeah, this game was altered for the European market thanks to German censorship laws, but I did kind of like the robot designs they substituted for the human characters. That's not the problem. The problem is that it's so darn syrupy. Again, it's not massively obvious to look at right away, but the guy on the left definitely does move faster than the robot on the right. Both running without stopping, there's no question about who'll get there first. This is an amazing game that lives on its fast, fluid action, but here in Europe, well, we had to make do with a version that was 17% less awesome. Well, okay, if you want to be totally accurate, 16.792% less awesome, taking the exact frame rates into account. To be fair, not all games were quite so bad. Some were optimised for PAL consoles to work better, including quite a few Nintendo first-party games. Super Mario Bros. Got this treatment and the gameplay is sped up, so it more or less matches the NTSC version, but somehow this made the music too fast. It must be tied to the game logic in a weird way, but hey, it does pretty much play okay. With Super Mario Bros. 2, well, they did get the music right on this one, more or less, but not the actual gameplay, which is still too slow. Come on, Nintendo, don't troll us like this. Oh, just fix the music, they'll never notice the difference. Well, we did, Nintendo, we did. It took us a while, but we did. Super Mario Bros. 3, though, does manage to combine these two elements into something that actually works pretty well. Both the gameplay and music are actually pretty decent. Side by side with the original, you can hear and feel some minor differences, but really, it's fine. If every NES game on PAL consoles worked this well, complaining about it would just be nitpicking. But sadly that's just not the case. Most aren't optimised at all, and even the ones that are often not done well. In both The Legend of Zelda and Kirby's Adventure, the main character is sped up, the music is adjusted, but not the enemies. Clearly they didn't get that memo. And yes, there are a few games that were actually designed to run on PAL consoles from the start and so do run at the right speed, including a particular favourite of mine, Elite, which actually won't run properly at all on an NTSC console. But I have to say, at least on the NES, these games are pretty few and far between. Now, as I said, this isn't just the NES that has this problem, other consoles do too, including the Sega Mega Drive, with many of its games running slower by the same amount for the same reason. Some games were optimised to a greater or lesser degree, but many others weren't. Take Sonic, for example. What you're seeing now is the NTSC version running at full speed. Now let's take a look at the PAL version running on the original hardware. It's all a little bit more ponderous, isn't it? Yes, Sonic, the game that's all about speed, but not so much in PAL territories. Again, you couldn't say that it's unplayable, but well, it really isn't quite the same. And if, like me, you've only ever played the original NTSC version and never played it on a PAL console when it came out, well, this really does seem like a downgrade. Anyway, this can actually be remedied, and quite easily in fact. All you need is a sharp blade and a stout heart to make a Mega Drive run at 60Hz just as God intended. Just cutting through this trace here should do it. Yes, there are better mods you can do, ones that will let you switch between modes, but for now this will do fine. And here we are running at the proper rate. On the Mega Drive or Genesis, the speed and the region of the console is set with some internal jumpers, and this quick and dirty hack puts it into 60Hz mode. And it is so much better for it, but I have got to say, doing this mod will stop composite video output from working, and probably RF output too for that matter, on any TV. You will have to use an RGB connection, but that does give far better results anyway. Also, it can mess with region locking too on some games, so really try this at your own risk. And what about the Super NES? Does that have the PAL disease? Well, yes indeed, of course it does. If you're playing the European, UK and well, Australia or New Zealand version for that matter, you're usually playing the cursed version. In fact, let's compare Contra 3 running in NTSC mode with Super Probotector. Yeah, it's the robot version once again, and it is slower, and it's not quite the game that it is in NTSC land. Again, it's not unplayable by any means, but the NTSC version is noticeably faster. There is a slightly different aspect ratio, as is common with a lot of PAL games and systems, but also the PAL version has less slowdown, I've noticed. A slower frame rate means more CPU clock cycles per frame basically, so it gets bogged down less. PAL isn't inherently inferior, it's just different. Again, some games are optimised for PAL to make them run a bit better to a degree. In Super Mario World, Mario managed to get into the swing of things running at more like the original speed, but not the enemies once more. Mario Kart is, well, it's a bit of a mess. The music is fine, the seconds on the timer go at the right speed, but not the rest of the gameplay. In fact, the music on most PAL Super NES games seems to be fine. It's obviously not tied to the frame rate, so it's just Nintendo gaslighting us with the timer on this one. Some of the few games that don't have this problem are the Donkey Kong Country series, which all run absolutely fine. Maybe not a huge surprise, as they were developed in the UK by British company Rare. Though that said, some of their early NES games can't boast the same thing, but anyway, well done Rare. So why does it have to be like this in the first place? Well, let's get on to that next, but first here's a word from the sponsor of this video, Squarespace. Squarespace is a platform that lets you make your own website for whatever you desire, whether it's personal, professional, business or just a hobby. If you need some sort of web presence, Squarespace can do it for you. It's not just a blogging platform, though you absolutely can use it to set up a blog if you want. It lets you develop a full-on, fully featured website that you can use to sell your products, advertise your services, promote your brand, or, like me, use it to support your YouTube channel. And extremely professional results are possible without specialist skills or knowledge, thanks to a whole load of customizable templates and other tools. So head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, head to squarespace.com/Shiropolis for 10% off your first order of a website or domain. And when they say free trial, they really do mean free trial. You don't need to enter any payment details or anything, and their pricing is dead straightforward. It's very reasonable. There's nothing hidden. There's no tricky marketing, so give it a go. So thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Let's get back to the issue at hand. What causes this? Why do we have this problem in the first place? Well, like I said, in Europe and many other regions of the world, the PAL or CCAM TV standard meant that most TVs operated at 50 frames per second and often would not be compatible with anything else. The trouble is that most classic consoles and most classic console games were designed in either the USA or Japan, countries which used the 60 frames per second NTSC standard. So to make these consoles and games work in 50 frames per second regions, the easiest thing to do was to slow the whole system down. You need 50 frames per second? Well, slow the console down 17% till it hits that number. The exact details vary from system to system, but that's basically it. It's not like it is on modern game systems where lower frame rates mean a slightly less smooth experience. PAL consoles aren't just updating the image less often most of the time, they are literally running the game more slowly. Doing it this way is the easiest, simplest and cheapest solution. It also guarantees pretty much 100% software compatibility. It might run slower, but a game made for the NTSC, NES or Super NES or whatever is going to work on PAL systems, except maybe in a few edge cases. I should point out that this is largely a problem with home consoles that plug into TVs, not any other game systems. Handhelds like the Game Boy or Game Gear of course have their own screen built in, and there's no technical difference between the consoles sold in different regions. And I should also say that a lot of the popular gaming-focused home computers don't suffer in the same way either most of the time. In fact, the situation is often reversed. The massive popularity of these systems in Europe meant that many games were made for PAL machines to begin with. Not just homegrown systems like the ZX Spectrum, but also the C64, Amiga, Atari ST. Most games on these systems were designed for PAL machines. But when it comes to consoles, pretty much every one from the late 70s to the mid-2000s had some sort of speed problem with PAL, well into the 32-bit era, from the ColecoVision to the Neo Geo to the 3DO and beyond. With the N64, the speed was set in software, not hardware, something that became pretty much the norm with other later systems as well. The game itself sets the speed, not the console. So if you're running the PAL version of Mario Kart, it's going to be slower. Again, not just a lower frame rate, the whole game runs slower. However, if you have an NTSC copy of the game and the means to get it working, you will get the proper game speed, even on a console sold in Europe. Same deal on the PlayStation 1, yes, Tekken 3, that fighting game classic, is slowed down for the PAL release, can you believe it? But if you do have a chipped PS1 and an NTSC copy of the game, then you can have the proper experience. In the next console generation, things did start to improve. Often games were optimised better, and a lot of them, across the Dreamcast, PS2 and GameCube, did have a 60Hz option built into the PAL release. They give you a choice when the game starts, allowing you to go for the 60Hz mode if your TV supports it, and many did even back then. And again, with these three systems, if you can get the NTSC version of the game running with a chipped console or a drive emulator or whatever, you're going to get the full frame rate. There's still, though, games on all three systems where the PAL version is going to be crippled. It was only in the 7th console generation, with the advent of high definition, that all this became irrelevant. The Xbox 360 and the PS3 both supported video out via HDMI at 60Hz no matter what the region, and games stopped being hobbled by TV standards. And today the problem is absolutely dead and gone. Modern consoles don't differ from region to region, they all play the games the same. There would be outcry if they didn't, wouldn't there? In fact, occasionally the old PAL versions of games do surface as re-releases, even outside of PAL territories. These days though, nobody lets it pass unnoticed and it is seen as quite a big issue. PAL makes a huge difference and I don't think anyone is being overly fussy when they highlight it. You don't need to be a PC Master Race Ultra with golden eyes that can detect the slightest perturbation in frame rates to notice the problem. I don't know or care what frame rate my Xbox runs Elden Ring at, I just know that it seems fine and that's all I need. But if the whole game is literally running slower, well, I'm going to complain. And it's just so arbitrary too, they slowed games down just because it was the cheapest, quickest thing to do. I wouldn't want to play the classic Castlevania Symphony of the Night slowed down by a random 17% any more than I'd want to listen to London Calling by The Clash pitched down by 3 semitones. I suppose you might argue that you want to play the PAL versions of these games for nostalgia's sake or maybe just Stockholm Syndrome. There are people who want to watch the Goonies on VHS or listen to REO Speedwagon on 8-track, but, well, this seems to be way more than that. The PAL version alters the whole feel of the game by a lot, and it's hard to see it as anything other than a change for the worse. Yes, you can modify some systems to restore full speed, but it's often a skilled job, and still, sometimes it's just not possible at all. There's no practical mod for the PAL NES, all you can do is, well, buy an NTSC one. Something that I would in fact recommend for pretty much every classic console. This is what it comes down to. If you want to play on the original hardware, don't bother with the crappy, half-arsed, compromised version they palmed off on us way back in the bad old days. Just get an NTSC console and be done with it. Most of them are pretty easy to get hold of online and they aren't particularly expensive. In fact, you might even find them cheaper than their PAL counterparts in some cases, and the games too often. And games can cause just as many problems. Sometimes a PAL copy of a game will work at the right speed on an NTSC console or a modded console, and sometimes it won't. Even if you can bypass the region locking, it still might not work properly. And in case you were wondering, no, the PAL Super NES version of Super Mario Bros. 3 on Super Mario All-Stars doesn't run at full speed unlike its NES counterpart. If you're getting into collecting classic consoles wherever you are in the world, just don't bother with PAL systems or PAL games for that matter. Unless it is purely for nostalgia or those odd cases where the PAL game is superior like Elite on the NES. There are going to be a few gotchas in running a foreign console. You're going to have to do a bit of research. It's going to be a bit of a hassle, but, well, getting any old system working these days is a bit of a hassle, PAL or whatever. Might as well put that energy into what's going to give you the best experience. It sounds harsh, but it's true, and if you already have PAL consoles, well, at least modify them if you can. And I suppose, to be fair, later systems like the PS2 are going to be okay if you're going to boot NTSC games, and yes, as we've seen, the Mega Drive is a super easy mod too, so that's not a total loss either. But for so many game systems, a PAL console is like a turntable that will only play your albums at 27 RPM. Yeah, you might be able to fix it, but why not just buy something that works properly in the first place? If you can, get something that will play games at the right speed, or just stick to modern emulators. That at least is dead easy. So this is the end of this rant, let's leave it at that, and I've not even mentioned the letterboxing, the black lines that ended up on the top and bottom of many games on PAL consoles either. Yeah, that was a thing because of the differences in resolution, but it's a minor point compared to the slow gameplay. I'm amazed that this doesn't get mentioned more often though, to be fair, a lot of British and other Euro YouTubers do tend to focus on computers rather than consoles. Anyway, thank you so much to my generous Patreons, your help is much appreciated, and if anyone else would like to join them, there is a link below. And I will now say goodbye and thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time, folks.